Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Borderline Podcast with me, your host, Andrew Willix. And tonight, guys, we're heading all the way across to California to be joined by author and psychic medium Chris Wasko. Now, we're going to be talking all things from narcissistical and abusive parents, what the common traits of that may look like, and the effect that that can have on children and elders growing up in later life. We'll be talking about spiritual healing and energy healing and the way that Chris adapts her own experiences to help treat others today. Now, once again, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of information that's relatable to some listen to this episode. So as ever, if you'd be interested in finding out more about Chris and what she does, then all the links will be below. And without further ado, enjoy. So, Chris Wasko, thank you so much for coming onto the Borderline Podcast this evening. How are you?
I'm great, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So, from California in the United States. We clarified that just before, originally from New York. Other than that, there's very little I know about you. There's certainly going to be very little, a lot of my local audience around here knows about you. So could you just give us a little bit of a background as to who you are and why your universes are crossing paths this evening?
Yes, I am a spiritual counselor, psychic medium, and energy healer. And I came into this work because of my own healing journey. And your podcast really spoke to me because of a lot of these aspects of my own childhood trauma, how I work with a lot of trauma, people that have dealt with their own traumas and how it affects energy. And I felt that we could really expand on that today.
Yeah. Like I say, we'll have a good chat, and I'm sure we're going to bring out a load of good information for a lot of people, whoever will be listening. So your story primarily starts around about breaking out of abusive and narcissistical childhood, right? So
Yes.
could you just, give us a run through of we'll just take it from there, and then we'll just kind of go on from the story, yeah?
Yes, I grew up with very narcissistic parents, and it is important to note that narcissism is a spectrum, and I have parents on opposite ends of that spectrum. My dad is a overt narcissist. He is extremely volatile, violent, and my mom is a covert narcissist. And it took me a very long time to see that, to understand narcissism, to understand my childhood under a different lens, because that was my normal. That was what I understood. And in that, I was raised to believe that I was the problem because I was very big about standing up to injustices, standing up to any kind of lying, because narcissists tend to be very good liars. And really, that's not to even be critical. Lying is a protective element. It protects us from a fear. What don't we want to face and feel we have to lie in order to protect ourselves from that, right? So it wasn't until I became a parent myself that I started noticing that I myself had narcissistic tendencies, because you cannot be raised in a household like that and not have some tendencies yourself. And I did not want to be that person. And as far as that journey of cutting off my parents, it led to the abuse starting to affect my children and my husband. So initially, when my oldest was 2 years old, my dad had hit him and lied to me about it. And I knew that something had happened. I could just tell. And the only reason I had left my child alone was because I had an infant at the time that I was nursing, and I had to go get something for him. And I came back and I saw my oldest nearly in tears, and I knew something terrible had just happened, because I know that face. I've myself had that face. And at that time, I was still, I would say, not having fully put the pieces together. And it was another 8 years that would go by where I finally cut off my parents, because you hurt my child. I was able to work past it to a degree. I'm still working on forgiving myself for that one, because that was really the time I feel I should have cut them off. But they are my parents, and I wanted to have a relationship with them, and I do love them even still. It's just when then that time went on and the cycle of abuse continued, my father threatened to hit my husband. And then I said, I'm done. And that was 7 years ago. And when that happened, is when I just went on this explorative healing journey. And unbeknownst to me, all this healing led me to opening up to spirit. I didn't know I could see people in spirit. I didn't know I was psychic. I mean, I would have maybe called myself an intuitive empath, but I had no idea what that one decision was going to do and how it would change my life.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. And sorry as well. It's obviously incredibly hard for you to talk about something like that. Because I guess in some ways we talk a lot about stigmas on this podcast, and there is a kind of element of stigmatism where to talk about your parents in a negative way, we are kind of brought out that, they are the figurehead of the household. So it's hard to really be honest with how we feel at times with our parents.
Yeah.
When you had that moment and you started going on your journey to separating away from them and realizing the narcissistical behaviors, did that make a lot of sense to you about your childhood growing up with them as well? Did it kind of fill in gaps and pieces about you personally too?
It did. I started immersing myself in books on narcissism, and how many times I would just be writing, quoting the book in a journal I had at the time of, just things that I had lived, really validating so many of my feelings, so many of my experiences, that I wasn't crazy, that and that I wasn't a problem. And I wouldn't even necessarily, I don't like to call my parents the problem. Narcissism is a generational pattern and a generational disease. So it's really the fact that they pushed it forward and I chose not to. And so for me, it was about being a cycle breaker. And in order to be a cycle breaker, you have to really make a very bold stand. And like you say, I mean, it's a stigma to cut off your parents. And I've certainly been harshly judged for it. But I've also been immensely supported for it as well, because I'm not the only one in my family that cut off my parents. So that at that time was very helpful when it was very difficult for me.
Yeah, thanks. And it's obviously incredibly hard to cut off your parents. But why are we seeing, I guess, because it is generational, like you say, or the narcissistical side, is that why we are possibly seeing now more and more kids stepping away from their parents because of that generational change to, I don't like to say wokeness, that's not the kind of way that I'm going at that, but the kind of new generational's way of thinking. It is a complete divide at times, isn't it?
Yes, and I think there is an aspect to waking up, because it's about, really, it comes down to self-love. Narcissists deep down truly do not love themselves. So when you love yourself, to say, this is not okay, I don't deserve this treatment, that's a huge step. And I think a lot of people now are taking those steps for themselves, because it's not about selfishness, it's about selflessness. And saying, I love myself enough to recognize that not only is this not okay, but I'm going to be better and do better in this process.
Yeah, so would you be able sorry, just to go back into the start of your spiritual journey, how hard was that? Obviously immensely hard, to be honest, but breaking away from your parents, how hard was that to kind of navigate your life? Was there still a bit of confusion about the decision to do so? And how hard was it to kind of push on and change the way that you thought yourself?
It was incredibly difficult in the beginning. I felt lost. I felt anxious for the first time in my life. I was scared. When you're raised with parents like mine, where you're punished and punished harshly, you're looking for what the punishment is going to be. And my mother is an extremely vindictive person. So I had a very strong feeling she was going to try very hard to take my children away from me. That was my fear. And I needed to face that fear and also recognize my own strength in that. And my first step at that time was to seek out a therapist that specialized in narcissistic abuse. And that was a really helpful first step for me, because it validated a lot of what I was going through and what I had gone through, but it also helped me get out of the victim mentality, because when we stay stuck in the victim mentality, we don't grow. So it's really about shifting past that, recognizing you're not a victim, you're a survivor, and then seeing where life takes you. Because like I said, that's what changed my life. I opened so many doors that I didn't even realize were there.
Yeah, and just that statement, you're not a victim, you're a survivor. Only 10 minutes into the episode, and that's a little gold mine in itself, because it is so true that we often, at times, we're guilty of holding ourselves back because we do feel that we are a victim of something, and it's so hard to try and see a way out of that, especially when we talk about mental health, because you could be the struggle with the aspect to move out away from a family environment. As you said, it brings about its own anxiety. It can cause a depressive environment. How long do you think it took you personally to kind of know that you were onto the healing process rather than feeling the victim side, if that makes sense?
Well, that's such a great question. I would say the first year for me was the most transformative, where I was really starting to separate myself from that victim mentality. I wouldn't say I would have called myself a survivor yet. I don't even think I would have titled myself at that point. I was just learning, really, if I'm going to mark what that time was. It was a very strong learning period, learning about who my parents were and are, learning about who I was and am, and really seeing the person I wanted to be, the type of individual, the type of mother, the type of wife, friend. Where did I want to go forward at that point, and how was that different from where I was?
Thanks. And could you just talk to us a little bit more, obviously, about what would be the kind of typical traits that we tend to see with the different sides of narcissism? Like you said earlier, you had your dad who was a narcissist, but your mother was a slightly different type of narcissist. Could you just explain and define them a little bit more with the typical traits that we see with each one?
Yeah, of course. So an overt narcissist, like my dad, is someone who is probably the more stereotypical narcissist, the one you would, if you're going to look up the definition, that's the narcissist you're going to learn about, the one that is more grandiose, very egotistical, cannot do wrong. You cannot correct that person, nor should you. Have some volatile tendencies. They tend to also have a vice. My dad is a functioning alcoholic, and there's just many elements of trauma that are connected to narcissism. So they're the ones that show trauma in a very outward sense. Not everyone may necessarily see that, but when you become well versed in how narcissism works, they're the ones that display it very openly. Whereas a covert narcissist, they're the ones that tend to be rather manipulative and rather quiet, because in my experience, my dad was this textbook narcissist. I didn't recognize my mother's tendencies. I didn't know what gaslighting was. I didn't know what manipulation was, what triangulation was. Especially the triangulation was huge in my family because I'm one of three children, and my mom was very good at pinning my siblings and I against each other. My dad would too, in ways, because it was a very competitive upbringing. Who was the best? Who really strived? Who did more? Who was really better at everything? So there's a lot of competition in narcissistic families, and there's a lot of not understanding who you are. So those elements of how you're treated and how you're raised, I think it really depends on the type of narcissism that's in your family. And I had two very different kinds, and I felt almost duped when I recognized my mother was a narcissist. That here I was, because my dad was the one that physically hurt me so much, I didn't recognize how much my mother emotionally hurt me. So that, I think, was the most jarring for me, because physical pain is really difficult, but emotional pain leaves marks we can't see, and it's a little harder to work through those and to heal from those, in my opinion.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you with that. Is like physical pain, without sounding obvious, it's painful, obviously, but emotional, especially from abusive pain. It's a true scar that takes a long time to heal. So, and like you said,
Exactly.
your journey's, it's not condensed into a year. It's progressively over years. So, how long into that again did you say you were on your journey, and then you really were opened up to this world of spirituality, I guess, and the psychic mediumship? That must have been mind blowing.
That
Does
was
want of a
mind
better word?
blowing. Yeah,
Yeah.
mind blowing is definitely the description because I had no idea what was happening as it was happening. And I think at the time I thought it was just a one-off really, or a time period like, oh, this is just a phase, this will pass, this is I would be speaking to someone as I'm speaking to you, and then I would see somebody in my mind's eye standing behind them, and I could describe them, and then if I felt comfortable enough to share, I would share. And that to me was just fascinating. And I didn't understand how to communicate with spirit because it's all telepathic and it's like speaking a different language. And because I didn't grow up understanding that, I really had to learn that. And I started taking classes to understand how to communicate. And a lot of what really helped me, especially what led me to do the work I do, is at this time, my children were still pretty young. So it was very common for me to go on play dates. And it's very common for especially mothers to share our motherhood woes and, the sleep deprivation, the struggles with our children and, trying to navigate motherhood. And what I was noticing is if anyone that would be kind of complaining about their frustrations or their child, or, oh, this kid is so frustrating, this is what he does, I would recognize that I could hear the inner thinking of the child and the parent. And I kind of became this, oh, I guess I could call it a translator, where I would kind of help interpret, so, and of course, these are mothers that I had grown relationships with. I wouldn't be doing this with any random person. I just think that's a little unethical and weird. But I would just say, hey, I know you think this. I just want to share with you. This is what he's thinking because I could hear it. And obviously, at this point, these are moms that were well aware of what I was experiencing and how I was hearing and seeing things. So it was a little easier at this point to be sharing. And I had a lot of very supportive mom friends that were like, you should be doing this for a living. You help people. When they would say, you have helped me heal my relationship with my child. I mean, that touched my heart like nothing else. It still does. I mean, I still get emails like that. You help me understand my child. You help me be a better parent. And that was the most transformational element for me because I recognized really what it was. I was helping people like me. So if that's not inner child healing, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like you say, that's really inspirational and uplifting, isn't it? Like when you
Yeah.
get such good positive feedback, and especially off of something that I'm going to assume that is something that you had no idea that this is the way that your life trajectory would take you on. How hard was it, I guess, to come to terms with that this is real, that this is genuine, and that that this truly can help people, because it is another way of thinking. I'm completely open to all walks of life, but it must be, it does draw a certain stigma again to it. Was that hard for you to sort of navigate your way through that as well? Like you say, obviously being around mums that you were quite comfortable with, obviously would have helped. Like you said, it'd be quite unethical to do that with complete strangers. So, how long, I guess, did it take for you to be truly confident with the ability to then pass on that advice to others? I guess that's the way that I'm trying to ask that.
I believe it was gradual. I can't really put a timeline on it. And this was also a time where my focus was more on my own children and my own family and protecting them because I was protecting from my parents and what came with that. My in-laws were also a factor in this. Because they also have narcissistic tendencies and initially were very insistent that we try and heal the relationship with my parents. So my husband got no support from his own family. So it was very isolating, very lonely. And so I was just navigating so many personal things that really to own where I was at with my professional life, it was really because I was helping people. So I would say it probably took a good year or two to really kind of be comfortable with, oh, I'm a psychic medium. Just those words, like you said, there's a stigma tied to that. And I prefer to work with the living more than the dead. So most of my clients are coming to me for energy healing. While I do psychic mediumship reads, I do more with, like I said, the living. I work with many adults. I work with children with their parents' permission, of course. So it was really, I think I became more connected to it when I saw how much I was helping kids and I could see their eyes change. So when they say windows are the eyes to the soul, it is so easy to see that in a child. So when a child has that dullness in their eyes, something has been shut off. And I love having a hand in helping turn that on. I'm not going to say I'm responsible for it. It really comes down to them and the parents. I just like to say I kind of have this, I'm like a little blip on their screen, and I appreciate those moments.
Yeah, that must be, like you said earlier, so rewarding, especially with children as well, because it's,
Yeah.
What would, just for the audience back home, could you define just what is energy healing?
Yeah, so I think every energy healer works a little differently. So I'll just explain a little more of how I work. If you were a client of mine, and a lot of my clients I do work with via Zoom, I would connect with you via our chakra system. So I would connect my heart and my solar plexus chakras with yours, with your permission, of course. And I would tune in and see what it's giving me, seeing what kind, this is, all psychic work. So it's what energies am I receiving? Do I sense any blocks? Do I sense any traumas? What chakra is closed? What chakra is fractured? And what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? So it's really just every session's different, and every person gives off different energy. We are all unique as individuals. And then it's going kind of beyond that initial layer. So let's just say, for example, I feel something in your heart chakra. I will go in, that's layer one. Okay, something's in the heart chakra. And then the next layer is, what is it? And, do I see something? Do I hear something? Sometimes I'll flat out hear like dad. So I'll just know, okay, something's connected to whatever's going on in the heart chakra to your father. And then in some cases, it will tell me right away, like, dad's out of the picture, dad passed away, or I just get dad and it's like dads and lights. So I'll just say, to my client, I'm getting this energy read in your heart chakra. It's connecting to your father. Could you tell me a little bit about that relationship? And oftentimes it kind of just expands on this. Well, I had this kind of relationship with my dad. And then these go into deeper layers, because what happens with energy is when you and I connect, or me and a client would connect, it's that first layer and diving into that. But there are so many other elements, there are so many other things that a human being carries, but that is the one that I am being told needs to be focused on first, because that is that outer layer. So as you start to work on those outer layers, you might then start to open others, where now another thing is coming up, and that took a back seat, but now you've healed that front layer, or you've addressed it, or whatever the case may be with you. And then we get to that next layer. So I like to help people work through that, because sometimes it's just hidden to us. Like, we might have something that we haven't faced in, 10, 20 years, and realize that it's blocking us from our next job or our next relationship, because it's created this block in our system that now doesn't allow the energy we want to come into our field. And it's addressing those. And so a lot of what I like to do is see, what are your goals? What do you want to do? How do you want to shift that? And let's see what's blocking you from that.
And thanks so much. The chakra, I mean, I'm a massive chakra meditator. Absolutely,
Love that.
It was a shame actually this year. I kind of paid less attention to doing it, but maybe in the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've really gotten back into it. And it is just so refreshing, isn't it? It's just a beautiful way of self healing. I have
Yes,
to just
absolutely.
ask it for my own personal question. There is there a chakra that you typically see more blocked up or issues with than any of the other chakras? Depending on what kind of issues that you're dealing with at all.
That's a great question. So, because I deal with a lot of trauma survivors, a lot of the chakras I tend to see are the throat, the heart, and the solar plexus chakra, because especially the throat, because people that are raised in a traumatic environment have either been criticized for being too outspoken or they did not speak much out of fear. So their throat chakra will reveal that it will be off in some way, blocked in some way. Heart chakra, again, trauma. People have been hurt, and the heart will show that. And also, the heart chakra reveals the kind of heart that person has, right? Like the proverbial heart, the kindness they exude, the compassion they exude, and not just all the negative. Like any chakra, it's not always about the negative, it's about the positive too. The solar plexus chakra, again, related to trauma, when someone is raised in a traumatic environment, the solar plexus chakra reveals that because they have had to navigate behaviors and be prepared for it. So it is a very personal, it's your personal truth. So it's anticipating behaviors. Fight and flight syndrome is often in that chakra. So I will see that a lot and feel that as well. So those are the most common. And then I would say more secondary is if I notice a disconnect between the root chakra and the crown chakra because something has just offset them where they are not grounded at all in their energy, and that's someone that feels very lost, doesn't really know what they want to do. A lot of depression will come into that kind of energy because there's such a strong disconnect. That's someone whose energy is very
Yeah, that's something. That's so coincidental that you say that. Because I'll quite honestly say there that part of my issue this year has been the kind of depression has really kind of came back in, and when I went back to doing the chakra meditations, it felt like the root one, without using the term the root of my problems, it truly was just in a state of, it felt in disconnect with the rest of my body, and that
Yeah.
unisonce was lost. So I'm very open to the ideas, and I completely believe in the ability of energy healing, like you say. Do you get any clients that are maybe not quite as open to it? And if that is the case, just how, again, mind blowing or eye opening is it to them when they really see that there is this journey of healing that they can go on by using, perhaps we could call them unconventional methods?
I would say I don't see a ton of skepticism, but I do appreciate when people are wowed. Like,
Mhm.
wow, how could you have known that? Wow, how did you see that? Or, wow, I never realized that, but it makes so much sense. So I do receive a lot of that. And I think also, if anything, it's people recognizing their own personal power because it's really what I try to do. Our healing journeys are unique and they are our own. And I am about guiding and giving the tools, but it is up to the individual to use them. So, someone that might be more skeptical, maybe even borderline cynical, that could be somebody that won't utilize any of the tools or practices and then say it didn't work. That is rare for me. I probably have only had one person that, and again, he was very kind about it. I wouldn't say it was, you know, anything negative. But I think his expectations was he was going to have this transformative session with me and he was going to leave no longer feeling depressed or sad. And when it comes to depression, depression is a low vibration and is also a very heavy vibration. And that doesn't happen overnight and it cannot heal overnight. So it does take time to remove the layers of something as heavy as depression because it's not like taking off a blanket. It's like taking off a knight's uniform and you've never done that before. And now you're like, okay, I got off the arms and the helmet. Now what? I think I'm stuck. So it's very much like that, if you can just think of that visually. So it's really understanding how your energy is disrupted and what it's connected to, and then not only work on shifting that, but it's in order to shift your energy, your body has to believe it, right? So if your energy is used to depression, your body is not going to recognize happiness. It is not going to recognize joy. So you have to teach your body what that feels like to the point where it recognizes it more than depression and wants to connect to it more, because our body and our subconscious mind likes to connect us to what we know because it helps us feel safe. So if we know trauma, if we know depression, if we know anxiety, that is going to be what our energy aligns to. So in order to shift that, we have to start doing little things day by day to shift that. And it takes work and it takes time. So it's really the dedication to self and the faith in yourself, that you don't see it, you don't feel it, but you just know you're going to get there because you believe enough in yourself to do that. And it's really about those baby steps, because, I like to compare this to someone that goes on a weight loss journey. If you drop way too much weight and it's just that dramatic short period of time, you've dropped a massive amount of weight, you're more likely to gain it back because your energy body is not used to that. So it's more likely to snap back. But people who gradually lose weight, they are more likely to have long-term success in their goals because they have been able to connect their energy to this new version of themselves.
Yeah, that was so well explained. Thank you very much. And that's, as well, as something that I can relate to, I guess, because, for me, it was around about this time last year, I kind of started my own sort of spiritual journey and understanding. Like, I've always been somebody that's enjoyed meditation, enjoyed the kind of connecting to oneself, but it's not that I've ever not believed just how important or how powerful that could be. I think I just didn't appreciate it as such. But as you quite rightly said there, this isn't an overnight journey. It's not a 1 week plan to self-improvement. This can be a lifelong trajectory. And you learn something new about yourself, or I find that, so much more easily as well. And you appreciate that as what so much more. Is there
So true.
a type of trauma that you see typical more with the children that grow up with abusive or narcissistical parents, as opposed to parents that are talking about it from their childhood? Is that a slightly different type of trauma that you would see?
That's a good question. Yes, is my quick answer, and I'll talk about them separately first in order to help make more sense of it. So for a child, it is a little easier to feel the energy and see things because they don't have all the stuff we accumulate energetically, emotionally, in every way, really. As adults, we pile on so much crap by the time we get to adulthood. For a child, it's a little easier. And so with that, it's more simple. And I would say the most common thing is a child does not feel heard. And when that happens, it will depend on their personality of where I'll see the most energy shifts, deficiencies. It really depends. So if there is a child that's very outspoken, that is a child I'm going to see some throat chakra stuff because they've been told not to be. And really, that's a child that just wants to be heard. But if you really think about that, that relates to adults too. But because adults carry so much more stuff, it takes a little more to break that down and to see really, really, what is it? Do you want to be heard? Do you want to feel loved? Do you want to feel supported? Because a child is more likely to feel loved. It takes more time, and it usually starts to hit, I see most commonly around age 11, where they may start to question, do my parents love me? But younger than that, that child is immersed in love. Even if they have parents that have hurt them so badly, they still very much love their parents and want to be loved back. It is not until you start to accumulate more of the layers and start really living other aspects of life that now your energy shifts more to reveal these other aspects, and the love is hidden or buried or cracked somewhere. So, like I said, with children, it's a little more simple to see it first. With adults, maybe not as easy to see at first, but when you really break it down, it still comes down to an element of their needs and wants.
Yeah, that's like I say, it's children just wanting to be heard, but they've still got so much love in their hearts. With such an early
Exactly.
age, they don't know how to love any differently, and that must
Exactly.
be hard to break down. But like we said earlier, so rewarding when you must see that there is progress being made. And this journey that you went on also turned you into an author as well,
Yeah.
and that's something that I hear, quite a bit with guests. I'm assuming that you never had plans to write your own book. Is that correct?
Not this book, that's for sure. And even when I had the idea of writing a book, it's not the book that I currently have out. The initial book I started with was really to help parents understand their children. So, like I said, that one is shelved, and really because I think I still am experiencing and exploring that journey. So I think there's going to be more to add to that book. So the book I do have out now is a children's book, but it's also a children's book that's geared towards an adults and inner child healing. It's called An Old Soul's Journey, and it really is. It's a simple book, but it's very spiritual and high vibration, and really connects you to you. So that's what I love about it. It is something that helps heal energy. So like I'll tell people, just read the book. You will feel something inside, most likely your heart chakra and possibly your solar plexus chakra as well, that speaks to you. And you may not understand it, but you're going to feel something. And I love that because, like I said, this was a surprise to me. I did not know this was going to be the book that was out there for me.
Yeah, An Old Soul's Journey, and like I say, we'll get all the links into the episode's description, so
Thank
everybody can
you.
go across and check it out as well. Um, something that took my mind just to speak on the Old Souls. Now, I'm actually, after this episode, I'm driving into a different town to go and pick myself up a curry. And we've got Spicy Old Souls, which is a system for old souls to understand their character, their passion, and their purpose. And I just asked the question now, I like a little bit of spiciness in my curries, but how do you understand your own spice levels and define that for me, please?
I love the comparison to curry. That's just amazing. So I came up with spicy old souls because it works like an archetype for old souls, because there is no one type of old soul, and there is a link between old souls and narcissism. And like there's a spectrum of narcissism, there's a spectrum of old souls. And I really like for people to understand more about their personality, more about themselves, more about their spiritual journey. So it's almost like looking at spice levels, like where are you at? Are you at that more mild level? Or are you at that more spicier, hot level that not everybody can take, maybe not even yourself? So it's really about exploring the depths of that. And you can look at that just as far as your everyday life, like a daily, where am I at? On spiciness level, or just a lifetime. I have a very spicy personality. It is hard to cross me without me having a bit of a reaction. And that's something I've had to work on in my life, because those are triggers, right? To have some knee jerk reaction. But it doesn't mean that I can't connect to being a warrior and connect to the standing up for injustices. And, but a lot of people have been taught to feel those things are wrong. So why I came up with this system and why I love the name Spicy Old Souls, the acronym is SOS, because a lot of old souls need help.
Yeah, it's so smart. That is
Thank
so
you.
smart, and I absolutely love the way you've described that.
Thank you.
That's so unique, and like I say, any sort of kind of analogical metaphor that we can then become so much self-aware. Just when you were saying that, I was thinking in my head, well, what would my spiciness level be? Because sometimes I can't handle myself. So that really
Yeah.
does just straight away. It makes you so much more self-aware, doesn't it? That's
Yes.
amazing. Something that I picked up on that you've been a couple of times when you've been spoken is, vibrations and frequencies. And that's something that we're talking about more and more now. But, from the past, it's something that, although this has to do with the past going back millennia, it's not a new thing. Just how important are, frequencies and vibrations that alter our own mental health, our own way of thinking, our own way of channeling thoughts?
I think they're incredibly important because it really comes down to that term, energy is in everything. And when we recognize vibrations in anything, the clothes you wear, the words you speak, the people you connect with, just really there's so many, the music you listen to, there's all different vibrations. So the more we connect to higher vibrations in our lives, right, listening to higher frequency music, or frequencies that are soul aligned, higher vibrational frequencies in the clothes and the type of material you wear. So like for example, polyester has a very low vibration, whereas cotton and linen have extremely high vibrations. So if you are sleeping in polyester sheets versus sleeping in linen sheets, you're going to feel very differently. So, and that's really just simplifying, but that is how important vibration and energy is for our everyday lives, and especially for our healing journey.
Yeah, that's so true. And worryingly, when you mentioned the bed sheets, I was just thinking, I was just like, I didn't even think of that myself. And that sleep's something I struggle with. Big bags under my eyes. Sleep's something I struggle with, and I've not even actually thought about that as being an indicator, despite the fact I really do believe in the way the energy flows and the vibration and the frequencies around us that does affect us. So I'm going to bear that in mind. Thank you very much for raising that to my attention.
Well, I'm glad you said that as well, because I will say too, especially because you live in Scotland, you do not want to combine linen and wool because they cancel each other out. So if you do decide to embrace any of these practices for yourself, when it comes to linen and wool, they are wonderful and both incredibly high vibration. They just, like I said, they will cancel each other out. So you just don't want to have those together.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. See that I love learning on these episodes. This is fantastic. Um, would you be able to talk a little bit, obviously, where you're at now, when you look back at your journey, and how different that must have seemed to you 7 years ago to where you are now? And where do you see yourself going from this in the future? Because it must have completely reshaped your life and the way that you interact with the world.
I think mostly it gave me a sense of identity of, at the time it was happening, I probably just would have connected to being a mother and fully embracing that because it took me time to embrace that. I have a background in business and I did very well in the business world. So shifting from that to motherhood, because I did make a choice to leave work to focus on raising my children. I was very much in that vibration, I will say, of just focusing on them, helping them have, a life that I didn't, in terms of just, working through my own traumas, working through, elements that I needed to be a better parent. And as far as just how that's progressed, like I said, I've just have this sense of self, this understanding of who I am, this self-love. And when I look back, my only regret is not cutting my parents off sooner, because I see how much it changed my life for the better and how much peace I have because of it. That is really the biggest thing. Of I just not only gave myself that gift of peace, I gave that to my husband, I gave that to my children. And as I move forward and see where that's going to take me, I think I don't really know, because even as a psychic, we're not allowed to see things for ourselves because it just takes out too much of the element of free will. But I have so much faith, and to connect to faith has been such a beautiful gift, because even though I don't know what's coming, I have faith that it'll all be wonderful, even when it's not, because now I have the tools to work through it. Now I have the tools to recognize it. And now I have the tools to help others. and just be a part of this collective lifting of the vibration.
Yeah, that was beautifully put. And like I said earlier, it's just so inspiring and rewarding and refreshing when you hear people that are recognizing changes and they make them in their life, and now they're turning their lives into helping others as well. It's so powerful and impactful. What I like to do at the end of every episode, Chris, is I like to just give you a minute, however many minutes you'd like, for any advice for anyone listening. Maybe they are currently trapped in an abusive family, and what we've been speaking about has resonated with them, or maybe even somebody that has escaped, but like we spoke about earlier, feels potentially a little bit of a shame due to that stigma of leaving your parents. Is there any advice that you could talk and give to them?
I believe the best line that I repeated in my mind for a while when I was first going through this was, you cannot change other people, you can only change yourself. And it's really about looking at that. What little things can you do for yourself today? What little things can you do for yourself now? And try not to focus on the past too much if you can help that, because the more we focus on the past, the more we stay in victim mentality. This does not mean you need to forget. This does not mean that what was done to you is okay. But when you're able to shift to the now and get to that place of what can I do for myself today, you start to get out of that victim mentality. You start to work toward that survivor energy. And you also recognize that I may not know what's to come, but I have faith that it will work out because I've taken these little steps. And it's just recognizing it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you might have some setbacks. I like to compare healing to mountain climbing. Some days you feel like you're going up, and other days you feel like you're just sliding down and you can't get a grip. And other days you're just moving along. So it's just right, having forgiveness for yourself and everything you've been through. Because a lot of times, especially when we've had abuse in our lives, we can get very angry at ourselves for allowing it for as long as we did. And that forgiveness for ourselves is so important. As I said earlier, I'm still working on forgiving myself for my dad hitting my child, because I feel if I didn't expose my child to him, that never would have happened. And I even moved away prior to, and we were there on a visit. So that was something I really have had to work on. And that child is now 17 and flourishing, and I'm grateful. But it's like I said, those little moments, the self-love, the forgiveness, the faith, and see where that takes you, and just trusting yourself. You know better, you'll do better, and you'll get there. And really, it's just, even if you don't see it, just recognize the possibility.
Yeah, it's every single time I do an episode, there's always one thing that I can take away personally from it, and the massive message that I've got from you and from doing this is have that faith in yourself. That's something that I'm only just like, it's weird. It's always coincidental when I do these episodes, and they just kind of fit in the time. And it's something, like I say, when I go back to just getting back into the chakra meditations and a bit of self-healing, becoming that little bit more self-aware, that again, like you said, you can have these bad days, but just know that they are going to make sense to you at the end of it. They are part of the process. They are part of the journey. It's not all plain sailing, but like I say, never give up. And so thank you, personally for me, this has been highly informative and something that I've been able to relate to and resound with personally. So Chris, honestly, thank you so much for coming on the Borderline podcast. I've really enjoyed having you on.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. This has been a pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and like I say, you're welcome back on absolutely anytime. We'll put all the links to your website, to your book, in the description below. And yeah, it's just been so fun because I love having these newer conversations. And like I say, it's something that a year ago I never thought I'd been speaking to people about this, and it just goes to show just how powerful it can be as a route of healing and a route of therapy, and ultimately a route of change, because it's just about trying to make the world a better place at the end of the day, is what I'm trying to say there, in a long rounded way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, connecting to others on this journey has absolutely been pivotal for me too. Just because we are all in some way healing and growing and learning. And when we could just really create space for each other to support that in one another, it does so much for us. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, honestly, thank you so much for coming on. I just realized, actually, going back that you're in California. What time of morning is it across there? It's got to be quite early, is it not?
It's 9:30 in the morning, so not too
Yeah,
early.
I was thinking. Well, New York. I think from us, New York's around about 5 hours behind.
Correct,
And I was
yes.
thinking, well, that's on the whole other coast. And America, I think, is it three different time zones?
What is that? It's like Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. And then you have
Yeah.
Hawaii. That's another,
Oh, wow. Oh, didn't even think of that. There
yeah,
we go.
another
Oh,
three
that's a
hours
brilliant quiz
back.
question coming up next time.
Yeah.
Chris, honestly, thank you so much for coming on the Borderline podcast tonight. I'm sure there's going to be so many people across here in Scotland and locally and all across the world that will be listening to the episodes that will take something out of this. So one more time, just thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And guys, that's it for this evening. I really hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. From Chris Wasko across in California and from Andrew Willix here in Scotland, this has been the Borderline Podcast. Good night.